Okay, so came in the gym this morning and understandably everybody's talking about Jack Catterall, but they're not really talking about the fight. Essentially, they're talking about the decision. They're saying, how could this decision happen? This is terrible. And, something needs to be done and so on and so forth. Well, this kind of keeps happening. I mean, you've got to look at this and obviously, with a bit of perspective. I mean, we have to look back a whole 2 weeks to find another controversial decision in Ryder's victory over Jacobs, where, a lot of people maybe saw the fight differently on the TV to what the judges saw and scored. So I thought today I'd go through a little recap, because obviously you end up talking to people, and especially people who don't know boxing a lot, just think, well, therefore the sport is inherently corrupt. If these wrong decisions are being rendered, how on earth could it happen like that without bribes taking place, without people being bought off? And so I just thought I'd run through a little recap of boxing scoring, how it works, and how, some of these decisions can come about. It's going to be a brief recap. I'm briefly going to recap the scoring system. I'm briefly recap some problems with it. I'm not going to go into a great deal of depth with it. So, if there are things I've missed, then hopefully I've missed them intentionally. But first of all, I suppose the first thing to say is, how is boxing scored? Boxing is scored, professional boxing is scored on a 10-point must system. So the winner of a round gets 10 points. The loser of a round generally gets 9 points. And that can be a 10-8 score if a fighter has been knocked down, or if a fighter is completely dominant. There is such thing as a 10-7 round. They're very rare. That would be, for example, Manny Pacquiao against Ricky Hatton, first round when Hatton was knocked down multiple times and completely dominated. That's a 10-7 round, but most rounds are 10-9. What are the judges looking for when they score these rounds? Well, actually, no, let's go back a bit. So that's the scoring system. So in a 12-point fight, the maximum points you could score would be 120. If you won or drew every round, because you can draw a round. A round can also be 10-10. So, if it's unable to pick a winner. There are 3 judges at ringside rendering these scores. So at the end of in championship fights, so at the end of a fight, they read out the 3 scores. If all 3 scores are in agreement, as in they are weighted one way, one fighter has scored more points than the other fighter, that's what you call a unanimous decision. All judges are in agreement that one fighter won. If you get a split decision, you get one judge saying one fighter won and giving him more points, and the other judge, 2 other judges saying the other fighter won. You can also get majority draws and split draws. So obviously those are the results that really can be rendered on the 10-point must system with 3 judges. So the question, I suppose, really we have to come to is, how are judges getting it so wrong? Or how can they get it so wrong? Well, one argument is that the judges are watching the fight from a different viewpoint to you on the screen. They are sitting down at ringside. They're around 3 sides of the ring. So they're watching a slightly different fight in a way. And each of them could arguably be watching a slightly different fight, because if you've got your back to one judge, he may not see some inside work that you're doing. Another judge may see it very clearly. The other thing is, how do they score this? How do they work this out? Well, the fighter is supposed to score scoring blows. And so you're going to judge a round in its entirety from start to finish, and you're going to say who was the dominant fighter in that round. The way you do that, like I say, scoring blows, so that's knuckle part of the glove connecting with the target part of the body, which is anywhere above the waist, in front of the mid and the head, in front of the midline of the body, and the midline of the head. So those blows have got to land. So sometimes, if you're in the crowd, you can't see those shots being blocked and everything else, whereas the judge, being a lot closer, can see that. Also, you're scoring on effective aggression. So if a fighter is coming forward, effectively landing blows or countering, and you're scoring on ring generalship. So we're getting a lot of subjectivity here in how a fight is scored. One person looking at it may see one fighter being dominant because he may prefer a certain style of boxing over another. You try and iron that out with training the judges, but inevitably you've got human subjectivity in this. So there is that angle to it. Also, one of the key questions in terms of corruption, I suppose, if you're getting outside the judges being incompetent, which is often something that's levelled at them, it's also the bribery issue. Now, the bribery issue, I don't think is a non-starter. Boxing is not openly corrupt. In my experience, I've never heard of it, but inherently within it, there are elements that can be open to corruption. For example, for a championship bout, A promoter will have to appoint judges from the governing body that's sanctioning that championship bout. So he pays the governing body, doesn't pay the judges, so it's not him saying, I'll give you loads of money so you could back my fighter, but he does pay the sanctioning body. Now, if it's his show, it is incumbent on him to look after the judges. But I say look after, I mean, if they've got to fly in, he's going to have to pay airfares. If they've got to stay in a hotel, he's got to stay, he's got to pay that. He's got to pay their hotel expenses and any reasonable expenses because he's hosting them at his show. Now, in a way, that's open to abuse because there's nothing that says you can put him in a £50 a night hotel. You can put him in a £3,000 a night hotel. Now, which one do you think he's going to prefer? You can pay for his room service bill. You can make it very, you can say you can have whatever you want. You can pick him up from the hotel, or you can just kind of leave him to it. Now, in a way, again, this is human nature. How you treat that judge as a promoter is perhaps going to make a difference to the judge's perception of you, and therefore maybe his perception of your fighter. And also the other thing is, if you do all this and you lay all this on and you fly this guy to Vegas and you put all this on for him, it's human nature that he's going to want to come back. Now, if he renders a decision that is unfair to your fighter, and he may be morally impeccable, and he may render a complete decision completely as he sees it. But if he renders a decision against your fighter, you may not decide to invite him back. So the next time you pay that sanctioning body and the judge's name comes up again, you say, no, I don't want that guy. I didn't really like his performance last time. I don't want him. So, that, I'm not saying that's inherent and obvious open corruption, but it's open to abuse. The other thing is there is a home crowd factor. Again, we're coming down to human nature here. I mean, I've said that you need to judge the round in its entirety, from the first second to 2 minutes, 59 seconds. You need to judge and assess that round on that. But human nature, we're always told as fighters, you've got to impress in the last 10 seconds. The last 10 seconds, you've really got to go for it. Because when that 10 seconds is over and the bell has gone for the end of the round, the judge picks up his pen. What's he going to remember? Maybe he might remember your brilliant bit of footwork at the start and your brilliant counter punching and moving off an angle. But the likelihood is with human nature, he will remember the fighter that was kind of dominating in the last 10 seconds. So that's why it's a very important part of the round. And we were always taught that right from the amateurs. You've also got a home crowd influence here. And I mean, again, this is a human nature thing. If you've got two guys fighting, and every time, and this would have been the case last night, with Catterall against Taylor, because you had a very partisan crowd in Glasgow. Every time Taylor was landing, the cheers would go up. It's human nature to perceive that maybe as a blow that's landed or as a blow that's more effective. Whereas the away fighter, Catterall, even though Catterall was landing much more, there weren't the same, cheers and so on. Now, you could say a judge should be skillful enough to exclude that from his perception. And that's probably true in an ideal world. But I'm just saying that human nature does give you to that. Because, I mean, we've all watched a fight where we've heard the commentators maybe favouring one fighter and saying, what a great bit of work there that he did there, what a brilliant bit of, strategy there, and so on and so forth. And that can colour your perception as an observer, and often, if you get a controversial decision, a good thing to do is go back and watch the fight with no commentary. And you may find that you see a kind of slightly different fight. So really, it's that human nature. So, I mean, how could we... So that's what I'm basically saying is, I think these things are human nature. It's a subjective fight. It's not like football where there's not a lot of subjectivity over a goal. It's either a goal or it's not. I know VAR does sometimes call that into question, but in a very small amount of cases. But when a fight goes the distance, obviously the other thing, the strange thing with boxing is we get a knockout, we get a definitive, generally definitive, unarguable end to the fight. Although we have controversies over them as well sometimes. But when you go to the judges' scorecards, you're talking about three people's subjective view of the fight, which you hope will coincide. You also hope it will coincide with yours. And let's not forget, in the majority of cases, it does. But occasionally you get these decisions, and this is where I think it comes into it. This is where human nature and subjectivity can influence the decision, and the judges can be influenced to, in a way, go for what I'd call the home fighter, the fighter where the promoter who's supporting that fighter and is putting on the fight is paying their bills, where the crowd is vociferously behind them. So, what can be done about that? Well, I suppose really, I would say remove, the fighter would have to pay, the promoter would have to pay an absolutely set fee, but then he would go to make that maybe quite, luxurious when he accommodates judges and so on. And obviously different places have different costs. So it's very difficult to understand how to do that. But you could kind of remove that element from it. You can't remove the crowd because that's an integral part of boxing. It was interesting to see when we had, during the pandemic, we had, boxing without crowds, how the judges, couldn't be swayed by the crowd at all. And it was quite strange, that sort of atmosphere and that sound of the fighters fighting. But it's very difficult to see how you do it. I would say boxing is not endemically corrupt, but it's open to just abuses of human nature sometimes. So unfortunately, the thing is, I'm not giving an answer, I'm not giving a solution, but because it will happen again. Like I said, it happened 2 weeks ago, it happened the week before that, it happened the week before that, it'll happen next week, it'll happen the week after, it'll happen the week after. We just need to keep trying to do the best we can in boxing to not render this, because it puts off fans. And the first conclusion they do come to is either complete incompetence or corruption. I don't think those things are the case, but hopefully I've outlined, a couple of how these things can happen and how it can go wrong in a boxing ring for scoring. And we just got to try and keep it to a minimum. And also remember that the majority of decisions rendered are correct, and most fans agree with them. Okay, thanks very much, and on to next week. Let's hope it's not controversial.